What you're about to hear sounds like it came straight out of a revenge fantasy, but every word of this story is true. Sarah Martinez thought she'd lost everything when she discovered her billionaire husband's affairs and faced his ironclad prenuptial agreement that left her with almost nothing. But sometimes the very chains meant to bind us become the keys to our greatest freedom. What happened next didn't just change Sarah's life. It rewrote the rules of what's possible when you refuse to stay down. Meet Sarah Martinez, a 34-year-old former marketing executive from Austin, Texas, who in January 2019 believed her biggest worry was choosing between the yacht club's charity committee and the country club's fundraising board. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile that could light up any room, Sarah had spent the last 8 years of her life as the perfect trophy wife to tech mogul Richard Blackstone, founder and CEO of Blackstone Digital Solutions. Their sprawling 12,000-square-foot mansion in Westlake Hills overlooked Lake Austin, complete with infinity pool, wine cellar, and a garage housing Richard's collection of luxury cars worth more than most people's homes. To the outside world, Sarah lived a fairy tale existence, attending gallery openings, charity galas, and exotic vacations to places like the Maldives and Swiss Alps. But behind the designer clothes and picture-perfect social media posts, Sarah felt increasingly isolated and controlled. Richard's prenup, crafted by the city's most expensive family law attorneys, was a 47-page document that essentially treated her like a high-end employee rather than a spouse. It stipulated that in case of divorce, Sarah would receive exactly $2.3 million, a sum that seemed enormous to most people but represented less than what Richard spent on wine in a single year. The stakes couldn't have been higher. At 34, Sarah had been out of the workforce for 8 years, had no children to provide emotional anchor, and faced the terrifying prospect of starting over with what amounted to pocket change in her former social circle. She had sacrificed her career in digital marketing, where she'd been making $85,000 annually with a promising trajectory, to become the perfect hostess and companion Richard required. What Sarah didn't know on that cold January morning as she sipped her coffee and planned another day of supervised luxury was that her world was about to shatter in the most devastating and ultimately liberating way possible. The very prenup designed to keep her dependent and grateful was about to become the unexpected foundation for the most spectacular comeback story you'll ever hear. If you're enjoying this story of transformation and want to hear more inspiring tales of people who turn their lowest moments into their greatest victories, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more stories that prove it's never too late to rewrite your life's narrative. Sarah's typical day in early 2019 began at 6:30 a.m. in their master suite, a room larger than many apartments, overlooking the misty waters of Lake Austin. She'd wake to find Richard already gone, having left for his downtown office before dawn. The California king bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than a car payment, felt vast and empty without him. By 7 a.m., she'd be in their home gym, a fully equipped space with floor-to-ceiling windows and the latest Peloton equipment. Sarah maintained her figure religiously, not just for herself, but because Richard's comments about other women's appearances had grown increasingly pointed over the years. "Look at Jennifer Morrison," he'd say, referring to another tech executive's wife. "She's really let herself go since turning 40. After her workout and breakfast of steel-cut oats with organic berries, prepared by their housekeeper Maria, Sarah would review her calendar. Monday might be a board meeting for the Austin Children's Museum, where she served as the secretary, mostly taking notes while the actual decision-makers, all wives of men wealthier than Richard, made the real choices. Tuesday could be lunch with the other tech wives at the country club. Conversations that revolved around vacation destinations, interior designers, and carefully veiled competitions about whose husband had been featured in which business magazine. The loneliness was crushing. Sarah found herself having longer conversations with Maria than with Richard, who would return home around 9 p.m., eat the dinner she'd had prepared, and disappear into his home office to continue working. Their conversations had devolved into logistics about social events, travel arrangements, and household management. "Don't forget the Hendersons' anniversary party on Saturday," Richard would say, not looking up from his phone during dinner. "Wear the blue Valentino dress, the one that shows you actually work out." Sarah had learned to bite her tongue. The few times she'd tried to discuss her feelings or suggest couples therapy, Richard would remind her of how lucky she was. "Do you know how many women would kill for your life?" he'd ask, gesturing around their immaculate home. "You have everything you could want, and you're complaining about what exactly? That I work hard to provide all this?" The prenup's psychological weight grew heavier each year. Sarah had been a rising star at Digital Dynamics, a marketing firm in Austin, before meeting Richard at a tech conference in 2011. She'd been presenting on consumer behavior analytics when he approached her afterward, impressed by her insights about millennial spending patterns. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, private jet trips, and Richard's considerable charm when he chose to deploy it. But the prenup negotiations revealed a different side of Richard. His lawyer, Margaret Chen, one of Austin's most feared divorce attorneys, had presented the document like a business contract. Richard sat beside her, nodding approvingly as Chen explained that the agreement protected his premarital assets and business interests. "Sarah's a smart woman," Richard had said, his hand on her shoulder feeling more possessive than affectionate. "She understands this is just good business. We're not planning to divorce, but if we do, this keeps things clean and simple." The $2.3 million figure had seemed generous at the time. Sarah was making $85,000 and had student loans and credit card debt. But as Richard's wealth exploded from approximately $50 million when they married to over $400 million by 2019, that fixed sum began to feel insulting. By December 2018, Sarah had started noticing changes in Richard's behavior. He was taking more business trips, often to cities where Blackstone Digital had no offices. His phone, once casually left on counters, never left his side. He'd installed a home office security system that required a code she didn't have, claiming it was for client confidentiality. The breaking point came on January 15, 2019, during what should have been a routine evening. Sarah was in the kitchen, discussing meal planning with Maria, when Richard's laptop chimed with a video call notification. Richard was upstairs showering, and the laptop was open on the kitchen island where he'd left it after dinner. The caller ID showed Ashley Chen Business Development, and Sarah almost ignored it, assuming it was work-related. But something about the timing, 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, felt wrong. Business calls didn't happen that late unless there was an emergency. Sarah glanced toward the stairs, hearing the shower still running, and made a decision that would change everything. She answered the call. A young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair appeared on screen, wearing what was clearly lingerie and sitting in what looked like a hotel room. "Hey baby, you said you'd call me after." The woman stopped mid-sentence, her face registering shock and confusion. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice somehow steady despite her racing heart. "I think you have the wrong number." The woman's face went pale. "Oh my God, you're his wife." It wasn't a question. The shower was still running upstairs. Sarah had maybe 3 minutes before Richard would discover what was happening. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm Ashley. I work for... I thought you knew. Richard told me you two were separated, that the divorce was just paperwork at this point." The young woman looked like she might cry. "I'm so sorry. I never would have. If I'd known you didn't know." Sarah's hands were shaking, but her voice remained calm. "How long?" 8 months, Ashley whispered. "But he said..." God, I'm so stupid. "He said you were already living separate lives, that it was just a matter of time before it was official." The shower stopped upstairs. Sarah could hear Richard moving around in their bedroom. "I have to go," she said quietly. "Wait," Ashley called out desperately. "I'm not the only one. There's been others. I thought I was special, but..." The call ended as Sarah closed the laptop. But what you're about to hear next makes this betrayal look like just the beginning of Sarah's journey. The real story starts with what she did in the next 60 seconds that set the stage for the most spectacular reversal of fortune you've ever heard. Sarah stood in her kitchen for exactly 37 seconds after ending that video call, her mind racing through 8 years of marriage in fast forward. Every late-night meeting, every unexplained business trip, every time Richard had made her feel paranoid for asking simple questions about his schedule. The pieces weren't just falling into place, they were crashing down like an avalanche. She heard Richard's footsteps on the marble stairs. In that moment, Sarah made a choice that would prove to be the first step toward her liberation. Instead of confronting him immediately, instead of screaming or crying or throwing his laptop against the wall, she decided to investigate. "Babe?" Richard called out as he entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower, wearing his usual post-work uniform of expensive gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. "Was someone at the door? I thought I heard voices." Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time in years, she really looked at her husband. Richard Blackstone was undeniably handsome at 39, with the kind of silver-touch dark hair that made him look distinguished rather than older. He maintained his physique with a personal trainer and had the easy confidence that comes from never having been told no about anything that mattered to him. "Just Maria finishing up," Sarah lied smoothly. "She was asking about tomorrow's grocery list." Richard nodded, already losing interest as he grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from their sub-zero refrigerator. "I'll be working late in the office tonight." Don't wait up, his home office, the one with the security system she couldn't access. Sarah watched him walk away, and instead of feeling the familiar pang of loneliness, she felt something else entirely: determination. The next morning, after Richard left for downtown Austin at his usual 6 a.m., Sarah began what she would later call her education. She started with his laptop, but Richard had changed his password from their wedding anniversary to something she couldn't guess. His phone was hopeless, protected by both a passcode and fingerprint recognition. But Sarah had spent 8 years managing their household, and she knew things about Richard's habits that he'd forgotten she knew. He was methodical about everything, including his infidelities, as it turned out. She started with their credit card statements, which she accessed through their shared financial dashboard. Richard earned approximately $2.3 million annually as CEO, plus bonuses and stock options that brought his total compensation closer to $4 million per year. But as Sarah scrolled through months of charges, patterns emerged that made her stomach turn. Hotel rooms in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio on dates when Richard claimed to be in client meetings. But when Sarah cross-referenced these with Blackstone Digital's actual client locations, which she found through Richard's own LinkedIn posts about business development, nothing matched. The Ritz-Carlton in Dallas on September 15, 2018. Richard had told her he was meeting with a potential client about their expansion into renewable energy consulting. But his LinkedIn showed him at a tech conference in San Antonio that same weekend, and the credit card showed 2 dinners charged that night, one for $340 and another for $180, exactly 3 hours apart. Sarah felt like a detective, but one investigating her own life's destruction. She printed everything, creating folders organized by date and location. The pattern was extensive. Over the past 18 months, Richard had spent approximately $67,000 on hotels, restaurants, and what appeared to be gifts in cities across Texas. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah remembered Richard's obsession with collecting business cards. He kept them in a leather portfolio in his home office desk drawer, the one piece of furniture in that room that wasn't secured behind his electronic locks. On Thursday morning, January 17th, while Richard was in a board meeting downtown, Sarah slipped into his office. The portfolio contained hundreds of business cards, but as she flipped through them, several stood out. Ashley Chen, business development, but the company listed wasn't one of Blackstone Digital's clients. It was a boutique marketing firm in Houston. There were 3 other cards for women at companies that didn't appear in any of Richard's legitimate business correspondence. Jennifer Walsh at a Dallas consulting firm, Maria Rodriguez at a San Antonio architecture office, and Stephanie Kim at a Fort Worth investment company. Sarah photographed each card with her phone, then spent the afternoon researching. Ashley was 26, a recent graduate from UT Austin's business program. Jennifer was 28, divorced, with a LinkedIn profile showing she'd recently joined her current company. Maria was 24, and her Instagram account, which wasn't private, showed photos from expensive restaurants Sarah recognized from Richard's credit card statements. Stephanie was 30, and her professional headshot looked exactly like the type of woman Richard always noticed at social events. The worst part wasn't just the cheating. It was the systematic nature of it. The way Richard had essentially created a rotation of relationships while maintaining his marriage as a convenient home base and social credential. Sarah's first instinct was to hire a private investigator. But when she researched the cost, she realized she couldn't afford it without Richard noticing. Their accounts were monitored, and while she had access to household funds, a PI retainer of $5,000 would trigger questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, Sarah decided to become her own investigator. She created a fake social media profile under the name Sandra Miller and began following the women on Richard's business card collection. Within a week, she'd learned more about her husband's double life than she'd discovered in 8 years of marriage. Ashley posted regularly from expensive Austin restaurants, often with captions like "business dinner with my favorite client," followed by heart eye emojis. Jennifer's Facebook showed her wearing jewelry that Sarah recognized as pieces Richard claimed to have bought for client gifts. Maria's Instagram stories included photos from the Four Seasons in Austin, the same hotel where Sarah knew Richard sometimes took afternoon meetings. But if you think discovering the affairs was the worst part of Sarah's story, you haven't heard anything yet. What she found out next about that prenup and Richard's real plans for their marriage would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about her own life. By January 25th, Sarah had documented evidence of at least 4 ongoing affairs spanning back nearly 2 years. But confronting Richard felt impossible. The prenup loomed over every conversation they might have. $2.3 million sounded like a lot of money until you realized it might need to last the rest of your life, especially when you'd been out of the workforce for 8 years and your most recent relevant experience was managing charity committees. Sarah's sense of isolation deepened. She couldn't confide in the other wives in their social circle, who were all married to Richard's business associates. She couldn't tell her family back in San Antonio, who had never fully approved of Richard, but would probably say, "I told you so," rather than offer support. The breaking point came on February 2nd, 2019. Richard announced he'd be traveling to Houston for 3 days for what he called intensive client development sessions. Sarah knew from her investigation that Ashley lived in Houston, and sure enough, Richard's credit card showed charges for a couples massage at a luxury spa on the first day of his trip. That night, alone in their mansion, Sarah sat in their living room surrounded by printouts of credit card statements, photographs of business cards, and screenshots of social media posts. The evidence was overwhelming, but the solution felt impossible. She called the one person she thought might understand, her former colleague, Jessica Wong, who had been her closest friend at Digital Dynamics before Sarah left to marry Richard. Jessica was now the creative director at a major advertising agency in Austin. "Sarah?" Jessica's voice was surprised when she answered. "It's been forever. How are you?" For the first time in weeks, Sarah broke down crying. Between sobs, she told Jessica everything. The affairs, the prenup, the feeling of being trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like a prison from the inside. Jessica listened without judgment, and when Sarah finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would change everything. "You know, Sarah, I always wondered what happened to that brilliant woman who used to run marketing campaigns that increased client revenue by 300%. She didn't just disappear, she's still in there." But what Jessica said next planted the seed for Sarah's incredible transformation. And what happened over the following weeks would prove that sometimes the worst betrayal of your life becomes the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened to you. The confrontation Sarah had been dreading finally came on February 14th, 2019. Valentine's Day, with bitter irony that would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Richard had returned from his Houston business trip the night before, bearing an expensive Cartier bracelet and reservations at Austin's most exclusive restaurant, Uchi. As they sat across from each other at their corner table, Sarah watched her husband of 8 years lie to her face with the ease of a seasoned performer. "The Houston deal is going to be huge," Richard said. cutting his yellowtail with surgical precision. We're looking at a potential $50 million contract over 3 years. The client was impressed with our development capabilities. Sarah knew he'd spent Tuesday afternoon at the Four Seasons Spa with Ashley, followed by dinner at a restaurant that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had the credit card statements in her purse, printed out and highlighted. She had screenshots of Ashley's Instagram stories from inside the hotel room. She had evidence that would have convinced any jury. But as she looked at Richard, handsome in his tailored navy suit, smiling at her across the table while jazz music played softly in the background, Sarah felt something die inside her. Not love, that had been dying slowly for months, but hope. The hope that there was some explanation, some way to save their marriage, some path forward that didn't involve destroying the life she'd known for 8 years. "Richard," she said quietly, setting down her chopsticks, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Something flickered in his eyes. Wariness maybe, or calculation. "Of course, babe. What's on your mind? Are you having an affair?" The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 seconds. Richard's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, practiced innocence. "Sarah, what would make you ask something like that?" "You know how hard I've been working. The expansion into Houston has been incredibly demanding." He reached across the table and took her hand, his wedding ring cold against her fingers. "I know I've been distracted lately, but it's all for us. For our future." She pulled out her phone and showed him the screenshot of Ashley's Instagram story from Tuesday night. A photo of champagne glasses and rose petals with the caption, "Perfect evening with my perfect man." Richard looked at the image for a long moment. Then at Sarah. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He was no longer pretending to be confused. He was calculating. "How long have you been spying on me?" he asked, his voice level but cold, in a way she'd never heard before. "Long enough to know about Ashley, Jennifer, Maria, and Stephanie." Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. "Long enough to know this has been going on for years." Richard sat back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Well, I guess we're past pretending then." What he said next would replay in Sarah's mind for months afterward. Richard didn't deny anything. Instead, he leaned forward and spoke in the tone he usually reserved for explaining complex business deals to people he considered intellectually inferior. "Sarah, let's be realistic about what this marriage has been. You've had 8 years of the best life money can buy. You've lived in luxury most people can't even imagine. You've traveled the world, worn designer clothes, been the envy of every woman in our social circle." He paused to sip his wine. "In exchange, you've provided companionship and maintained an image that's been valuable for my business relationships." "I provided companionship," Sarah repeated slowly. "That's how you describe 8 years of marriage?" "I describe it as a mutually beneficial arrangement. You got security and status. I got a beautiful, intelligent wife who enhanced my professional image." Richard's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were explaining a business merger. "But let's not pretend this was some great love story. We were compatible, we had good chemistry, and the arrangement worked for both of us." Sarah felt like she was looking at a stranger. "And the other women?" "Are none of your business, frankly. Our prenup doesn't include a fidelity clause, as I'm sure you remember." Richard signaled the waiter for the check. "You're entitled to your $2.3 million if you want to end this arrangement, but I'd suggest you think carefully about what you're giving up." The casual cruelty of it took Sarah's breath away. 8 years reduced to an arrangement. Her feelings dismissed as irrelevant. Her future treated as a business calculation. "What if I refuse the prenup?" Sarah asked. "What if I fight it in court?" Richard's smile was genuinely amused now. "With what money? What lawyer is going to take on Margaret Chen and my legal team on a contingency basis when the prenup has been reviewed by 3 different law firms and deemed airtight?" He leaned closer. "Sarah, you're a smart woman. Do the math. You can take your $2.3 million and start over. Or you can spend the next 3 years and every penny you have fighting a battle you can't win, only to end up with nothing." That night, Sarah lay awake in their California king bed while Richard slept peacefully beside her. apparently unbothered by having destroyed their marriage over dinner. She stared at the ceiling of their master bedroom, with its custom lighting and million-dollar view, and felt more trapped than she'd ever felt in her life. The next morning, Richard left for work at his usual time, kissing her forehead like nothing had changed. "Think about what we discussed," he said. "There's no rush, but I do have that Asia trip coming up next month. It might be a good time for you to make some decisions about your future." Sarah spent the day walking through their mansion like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The art collection Richard had assembled, worth approximately $800,000. The wine cellar with bottles that cost more than most people's cars. The infinity pool where they'd hosted parties for Austin's elite. None of it had ever really been hers, and now she understood that Richard had never intended it to be. She called Jessica again, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "He doesn't even care," Sarah managed between tears. "He acted like I should be grateful for the arrangement. Like 8 years of my life was just a business transaction. What are you going to do?" Jessica asked gently. "I don't know. I can't afford to fight the prenup, and even if I could, it would take years, and there's no guarantee I'd win. But I can't stay married to someone who sees me as a business asset." Sarah was sitting in their home gym, looking out at the lake she'd grown to love. "I'm 34 years old, Jess. I've been out of the workforce for 8 years. My most recent job experience is planning charity galas. You still have skills, Sarah. You were brilliant at digital dynamics. Marketing hasn't changed that much. It's changed completely," Sarah said. "Everything's digital now. Social media marketing, influencer partnerships, data analytics platforms I've never heard of. I'd be starting from zero, competing with 22-year-olds who grew up on this stuff." The worst part was the isolation. Sarah couldn't tell her family what was happening because her parents had never liked Richard, and dealing with their "I told you so" reactions felt impossible. She couldn't confide in the other wives in their social circle because they were all connected to Richard's business world. She had acquaintances, but no real friends outside of Jessica, and even that relationship had grown distant over the years. By the end of February, Sarah felt completely powerless. She had evidence of Richard's affairs, but it was legally meaningless. She had 8 years of marriage, but the prenup made that almost worthless. She had lived in luxury, but none of it was actually hers. The $2.3 million that had seemed like so much money 8 years ago now felt like a cruel joke. After taxes, it would be about $1.6 million. If she invested conservatively and lived modestly, she might make it last 20 years. But she'd essentially be sentencing herself to a middle-class retirement at age 34. Sarah began researching divorce attorneys anyway, hoping someone would tell her the prenup could be challenged. The first 3 lawyers she contacted all said the same thing. Margaret Chen was notorious for creating bulletproof prenups, and Richard's had been particularly well crafted. Fighting it would cost a minimum of $200,000 with no guarantee of success. But what happened in the first week of March would prove that sometimes when you think you've lost everything, you're actually standing at the beginning of everything. Sarah was about to discover that the prenup Richard thought was his greatest weapon would become the foundation for her most spectacular victory. And what she did next proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead. March 3rd, 2019, started like every other morning in Sarah's disintegrating marriage. Richard left for work before dawn. Their conversation limited to his reminder that he'd be traveling to Singapore for 2 weeks starting March 15th for expansion meetings. Sarah knew better than to believe him anymore, but as she sat in their kitchen with her coffee, scrolling through her phone while trying to muster the energy to face another day of being trapped in her golden cage, Sarah received a text that would change everything. It was from Jessica. "Check your email. I sent you something that might interest you. Don't give up yet." The email contained a link to a Forbes article titled "The Prenup Loophole That's Making Divorcing Women Millionaires." Sarah almost deleted it, assuming it was just another clickbait article about celebrity divorces. But something made her click through. The article profiled 3 women who had turned restrictive prenups into unexpected advantages. The key insight was revolutionary in its simplicity. If a prenup severely limited what you could receive from a marriage, It also severely limited what you were expected to contribute to maintaining it. In essence, the article explained, these women realized that their prenups had inadvertently created a situation where they had no financial obligation to their husbands' lifestyles or businesses. They were free to pursue their own ventures without any legal or financial entanglement. Sarah read the article 3 times, her excitement growing with each pass. She immediately called the article's author, financial journalist Rebecca Martinez, who agreed to speak with her that afternoon. The key question, Rebecca explained during their phone call, is whether your prenup includes any clauses about business ventures or intellectual property you might create during the marriage. Most prenups focus on protecting the wealthy spouse's assets, but they often neglect to claim ownership over what the less wealthy spouse might develop. Sarah dug out her copy of the prenup from Richard's home office safe, a document she'd signed 8 years earlier without fully understanding its implications. As she read through the 47 pages of legal language, her heart began to race. The prenup was incredibly detailed about protecting Richard's assets, his business interests, and even potential future acquisitions. But there was no mention of intellectual property, creative work, or business ventures that Sarah might pursue. The document assumed she would remain financially dependent and never develop assets of her own. More importantly, the prenup explicitly stated that Sarah had no claim to Blackstone Digital Solutions or any of Richard's business ventures, past, present, or future. But the reverse was also true. Richard had no claim to anything Sarah might create independently. This is actually quite brilliant, Rebecca Martinez said when Sarah read her the relevant sections over the phone. Your husband's lawyers were so focused on protecting his wealth that they created a unilateral document. You're completely financially independent, according to this agreement. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. But hope mixed with terror, because financial independence was only valuable if you knew what to do with it. That evening, while Richard worked late in his office, Sarah began researching business opportunities with the intensity she'd once brought to her marketing campaigns at Digital Dynamics. She started with what she knew: her background in consumer marketing, her understanding of luxury markets from 8 years of living in them, and her observations about what was missing in the Austin social scene. The idea came to her at 11:47 p.m. on March 5th, as she was scrolling through Instagram posts from the wives in their social circle. Every event looked the same designers, the same venues, the same predictable elegance that said expensive but whispered boring. Sarah had always been frustrated by the limited options for truly distinctive formal wear in Austin. The city's rapid growth meant more high-end events than ever, but the fashion scene hadn't caught up. Women either wore the same designers everyone else had, ordered from Dallas or Houston, or flew to New York for shopping trips that cost more than most people's cars. But what if there was a third option? What if someone created a luxury fashion service that brought cutting-edge designers directly to Austin's affluent women, but not in the traditional retail model that required enormous overhead and inventory investment? Sarah spent the next 3 days developing what she would later call the Austin Style Collective. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Partner with emerging designers from fashion capitals around the world to create exclusive pieces for Austin's social elite, but operate on a direct-to-client model that eliminated traditional retail overhead. Instead of maintaining inventory, Sarah would work with clients to select designs, then have pieces created specifically for them by partner designers. Instead of competing on price, she would compete on exclusivity and personalization. Instead of targeting everyone, she would focus on the narrow but lucrative market of women like herself, sophisticated, wealthy, and desperate for something different. The financial model was particularly clever. Sarah would take a 40% commission on each piece sold, with clients paying 50% upfront and 50% on delivery. The designers would handle all production costs and shipping, while Sarah handled client relationships, marketing, and curation. Most importantly, the business model required minimal startup capital. Sarah needed a website, marketing materials, and enough cash flow to cover initial operating expenses while she built her client base. The $2.3 million from her divorce settlement, if managed properly, could fund the business launch and provide living expenses for at least 2 years. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah realized she had something no other fashion entrepreneur in Austin possessed. 8 years of intimate knowledge about the purchasing habits, preferences, and social dynamics of the city's wealthiest women. She knew that Jennifer Morrison spent approximately $50,000 annually on formal wear, but complained constantly about seeing other women in similar pieces at social events. She knew that Catherine Rodriguez had been trying to find a designer to create a custom wedding dress for her daughter's upcoming marriage to a tech executive, with a budget of $25,000. She knew that Amanda Chen collected vintage designer pieces, but struggled to find contemporary designers who understood her sophisticated aesthetic. Most crucially, Sarah understood the psychology of luxury purchasing among Austin's elite women. They weren't just buying clothes. They were buying identity, status, and the feeling of being special. The women in her social circle were desperate to stand out while fitting in, to be unique while being accepted. On March 10th, Sarah made a decision that would prove to be the turning point of her entire life. Instead of waiting for Richard to return from Singapore to formalize their divorce, instead of spending months in depression and self-pity, she decided to start building her escape route immediately. She registered Austin Style Collective LLC with the state of Texas, using her maiden name, Sarah Martinez, as the managing partner. She opened a business bank account with $50,000 of her personal savings, money she'd accumulated over the years from gifts and household management allowances. She hired a web designer to create an elegant, minimalist website that emphasized exclusivity and personalization. But what really set everything in motion was Sarah's first client meeting, scheduled for March 12th with Catherine Rodriguez, whose daughter's wedding was only 4 months away. If you think this sounds like the beginning of Sarah's comeback story, you're absolutely right. But what happened in that first client meeting would prove that Sarah's greatest asset wasn't her knowledge of fashion or luxury markets. It was something much more powerful, something that 8 years of being dismissed and underestimated had only made stronger. Catherine Rodriguez arrived at Sarah's temporary office, a co-working space in downtown Austin, on March 12th at exactly 2 p.m., carrying herself with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. As the wife of a tech executive whose company had been acquired by Google for $340 million, Catherine was used to getting her way through sheer financial force. But what she found in Sarah Martinez was something she hadn't expected. Someone who understood her world intimately but wasn't intimidated by it. "I'll be direct," Catherine said, settling into her chair with the precision of someone who attended dozens of board meetings each year. "My daughter Sophia is marrying David Chen in July, and it's going to be the social event of the season. I need a wedding dress that will make every other mother wish they were me." Sarah smiled, pulling out a leather portfolio that contained sketches and fabric samples she'd spent the previous weekend assembling. "Tell me about Sophia. What makes her feel beautiful? What's her personality like when she's most confident?" For the next hour, Catherine talked about her daughter with the kind of detailed love that only comes from truly knowing someone. Sophia was artistic but practical, sophisticated but not pretentious, confident but not showy. She worked as a curator at the Contemporary Austin Museum and had very specific ideas about aesthetic beauty. "Most designers want to put her in something that looks expensive," Catherine explained. "But Sophia doesn't want to look like money. She wants to look like art." Sarah understood immediately. She opened her laptop and showed Catherine the portfolio of Marina Volkov, a 28-year-old designer from Prague whose work combined classical European tailoring with contemporary artistic elements. Marina's pieces looked like wearable sculptures, each one unique and impossible to replicate. Marina specializes in creating pieces that look like they belong in a museum, but feel like they were made specifically for the woman wearing them, Sarah explained, showing Catherine images of Marina's previous work. She uses traditional couture techniques, but incorporates unexpected elements like hand-painted silk details and architectural draping. Catherine's eyes lit up as she scrolled through the portfolio. "This is exactly what Sophia would love." "How much?" "For a custom wedding dress with Marina's level of craftsmanship, we're looking at $18,000, Sarah said calmly, though her heart was racing. It was more than she'd ever charged for anything in her life, but she'd done her research. Comparable designers in New York were charging $25,000 for similar work. "Perfect," Catherine said without hesitation. "How do we start?" Within 2 weeks, Sarah had 3 more clients. Amanda Chen wanted a custom evening gown for the Austin Symphony Gala, $8,500. Jennifer Morrison commissioned a cocktail dress for her husband's company's IPO celebration, $6,200. And Lisa Park ordered a suit for Austin's most exclusive charity auction, $4,800. But the real validation came when Sofia Rodriguez tried on her custom Marina Volkov wedding dress in early June. The dress was a masterpiece of subtle artistry, appearing simple from a distance but revealing incredible complexity up close. The bodice featured hand-embroidered botanical details that seemed to grow organically from the fabric, while the skirt moved like liquid silk with hidden architectural elements that created perfect proportions. Sophia cried when she saw herself in the mirror. Catherine cried. Even Sarah, who had been coordinating the final fitting via video call with Marina in Prague, felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I've never seen anything like this," Sophia whispered, turning to see how the dress moved. "It's like it was designed specifically for my soul." Word spread through Austin's social elite with the speed that only comes from genuine excitement. By July, Sarah had a waiting list of 12 clients and had partnered with 8 designers from around the world. Her commission revenue for the first 5 months of operation was $127,000, more than she'd ever earned in a full year at Digital Dynamics. But what happened next proved that Sarah's business acumen extended far beyond understanding luxury fashion. In August 2019, she made a strategic decision that would multiply her success exponentially. Instead of just serving individual clients, Sarah launched the Austin Style Collective Experience, a members-only fashion service that combined personal styling, exclusive designer access, and curated fashion events. Members paid an annual fee of $5,000, which gave them priority access to new designers, invitations to private trunk shows, and personal styling consultations. The psychology behind the membership model was brilliant. Austin's wealthy women didn't just want beautiful clothes. They wanted to belong to something exclusive. The membership made them feel like insiders in the fashion world, part of a sophisticated community that understood quality and artistry. Sarah's first trunk show, held in September 2019 at a private gallery in South Austin, generated $180,000 in sales in a single evening. 32 women attended, each having paid their $5,000 membership fee, and they purchased an average of $5,600 worth of custom pieces. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Sarah ran into Richard at a charity gala in October 2019. Their divorce had been finalized in August, with Sarah receiving her $2.3 million as specified in the prenup. Richard had been surprised by how smoothly the process had gone, apparently expecting more drama and negotiation. "Sarah," Richard said, approaching her near the silent auction tables, "you look wonderful. I heard you've been keeping busy with some kind of fashion thing." Sarah was wearing a custom piece by Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese designer whose work she'd discovered through her expanding network. The dress had cost $4,200, but Sarah had earned $23,000 in commissions that month alone. More importantly, she felt like herself for the first time in years. "I've started a business," Sarah said simply. "It's been quite successful." Richard smiled in the patronizing way she remembered so well. "That's great, babe. It's good to have hobbies. I'm sure it's fun playing with fashion and having something to keep you busy." Sarah looked at her ex-husband. This man who had controlled her life for 8 years and reduced their marriage to a business arrangement, he had no idea that her hobby was generating more revenue than many of Austin's established businesses. "Actually," Sarah said, "we're projecting $2.1 million in gross revenue for our first full year. My personal income will be around $840,000. She paused, watching Richard's expression change. "But you're right, it is fun." The conversation ended there. But Sarah learned later from mutual acquaintances that Richard had spent the rest of the evening asking people about her business, clearly shocked that his former trophy wife had built something significant. By December 2019, 9 months after starting Austin Style Collective, Sarah's business had grown beyond her wildest projections. She had 47 active members paying annual fees of $5,000 each. She had partnerships with 23 designers from 11 countries. Her commission revenue was averaging $95,000 per month, putting her on track to earn over $1.1 million in her first year. But more importantly, Sarah had discovered something about herself that 8 years of marriage had nearly erased. She was exceptionally good at business. Her marketing background, combined with her intimate understanding of luxury consumer psychology, had created a unique competitive advantage. Sarah's clients weren't just buying clothes. They were buying transformation. Each custom piece came with a personal story about the designer, the inspiration behind the work, and the craftsmanship involved. Sarah made her clients feel like patrons of art rather than mere consumers of luxury goods. The business model proved incredibly scalable. In January 2020, Sarah opened Austin Style Collective Beverly Hills with a local partner who understood the Los Angeles luxury market. By March, before the pandemic temporarily slowed expansion plans, she was exploring opportunities in Dallas, Houston, and Nashville. But what you're about to hear next proves that Sarah's success wasn't just about building a profitable business. It was about rebuilding herself from the ground up and discovering that the woman Richard had tried to diminish was actually extraordinary. The real transformation wasn't just financial. It was personal, psychological, and ultimately inspirational in ways that would impact not just Sarah's life, but the lives of women around the world who would hear her story. Sarah Martinez had gone from a woman trapped by a $2.3 million prenup to an entrepreneur on track to earn more than that amount in a single year. But more importantly, she had gone from someone who felt powerless to someone who had discovered her own remarkable power, and she was just getting started. As Sarah Martinez sat in her new office in February 2020, exactly 1 year after confronting Richard about his affairs, she reflected on the most transformative 12 months of her life. The space was a far cry from the co-working desk where she'd started, a sleek 2,000-square-foot suite in Austin's trendy South First District, with exposed brick walls displaying custom pieces from her designer partners and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. The numbers told an incredible story. Austin Style Collective had generated $2.4 million in gross revenue in its first year, with Sarah's personal income reaching $1.1 million. But the impact extended far beyond financial success. Sarah had created something that hadn't existed before, a bridge between the world's most talented emerging designers and American women who were desperate for something unique and meaningful. Her client base had grown to include not just Austin's social elite, but women from across Texas and beyond who flew in specifically to work with Sarah and her team. The membership model had expanded to include virtual styling sessions, allowing women from Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and even cities like Nashville and Atlanta to access Austin Style Collective's services. The business had also evolved beyond custom clothing. Sarah had partnered with jewelry designers, shoe craftsmen, and even architectural firms to offer complete lifestyle curation services. Her most successful month, December 2019, had generated $340,000 in commissions from a combination of custom pieces, membership fees, and what she called transformation packages, complete style overhauls that included wardrobe analysis, custom pieces, and lifestyle consulting. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Sarah's success was its sustainability. Unlike businesses built on trends or fads, Austin Style Collective was built on timeless human desires. The desire to feel special, to express individuality, and to own beautiful things that told personal stories. Each piece Sarah curated came with provenance, meaning, and craftsmanship that would last for decades. The personal transformation had been equally dramatic. Sarah had discovered that 8 years of marriage to Richard hadn't just been wasted time. They had been an inadvertent education in luxury markets, consumer psychology, and the business of exclusivity. Every charity gala she'd attended, every social gathering she'd hosted, every conversation with other wealthy wives had been market research she didn't know she was conducting. More importantly, Sarah had learned that her greatest strength wasn't her knowledge of fashion or her connections to wealthy clients. It was her ability to truly listen to what people wanted and translate those desires into tangible solutions. The empathy that Richard had dismissed as weakness had become her most valuable business asset. In March 2020, as the world began to change due to the pandemic, Sarah made another strategic decision that would cement her long-term success. Instead of panicking about potential business disruption, she pivoted Austin Style Collective to focus on what she called mindful luxury, helping clients invest in fewer, better pieces that would bring joy and confidence during uncertain times. The pivot was remarkably successful. While many luxury businesses struggled during 2020, Austin Style Collective thrived by emphasizing quality over quantity, meaning over status, and personal connection over transactional relationships. Sarah's revenue actually increased during the pandemic, reaching $1.8 million in personal income for 2020. But the real measure of Sarah's success wasn't just financial. She had become a respected figure in Austin's business community, serving on the board of the Austin Women Entrepreneurs Association and speaking at conferences about building sustainable luxury businesses. More importantly, she had inspired dozens of other women to pursue their own entrepreneurial dreams. Jessica Wong, Sarah's friend who had encouraged her during the darkest days of her divorce, often said that Sarah's transformation was the most inspiring thing she'd ever witnessed. She went from being someone who happened to wealthy people to being someone who created her own wealth, Jessica observed. But more than that, she went from being defined by someone else's success to defining success on her own terms. The irony of Richard's prenup had become a source of genuine amusement for Sarah. The document that was supposed to limit her options had actually freed her to pursue opportunities without any legal or financial entanglement. Richard's attempt to control her future had inadvertently given her complete control over her own destiny. In conversations with other women going through difficult divorces, Sarah often emphasized 5 key lessons from her experience. First, your apparent weaknesses might actually be your hidden strengths. Sarah's years as a trophy wife had given her insights into luxury consumer behavior that no business school could have provided. Her empathy and social skills, which Richard had taken for granted, became the foundation of her business success. Second, starting over isn't starting from zero. Sarah had thought her 8 years away from traditional employment made her unemployable, but those years had actually been an intensive education in a specialized market. Your life experience, even when it seems irrelevant, contains valuable knowledge and skills. Third, the limitations others place on you don't have to become the limitations you place on yourself. Richard's prenup was designed to keep Sarah dependent and grateful, but she used it as the foundation for independence and success. What looks like a cage might actually be a launching pad. Fourth, timing doesn't have to be perfect to be right. Sarah started her business during one of the most difficult periods of her life, without extensive planning or perfect market conditions. Sometimes the best time to begin is when you have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Finally, success isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Sarah's greatest satisfaction didn't come from showing Richard that he'd underestimated her. It came from discovering capabilities and strengths she hadn't known she possessed. As Sarah looked toward the future in early 2021, her goals had evolved beyond simple business success. She was planning to launch a mentorship program for women going through difficult transitions, whether divorce, career changes, or entrepreneurial ventures. She was also exploring the possibility of writing a book about her experience, tentatively titled The Prenup That Set Me Free. Most importantly, Sarah had learned to measure success not just in revenue or recognition, but in the quality of relationships she built and the positive impact she had on other people's lives. Every client who felt more confident in a custom piece, every designer who gained access to new markets, every woman who was inspired to pursue her own dreams represented a form of success that went far beyond financial metrics. The woman who had once felt trapped by a $2.3 million prenup had built a business that generated more than that amount annually. But more significantly, she had built a life that was entirely her own, filled with meaningful work, genuine relationships, and the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something valuable in the world. Richard's attempt to limit Sarah's options had backfired spectacularly, but not in the way most revenge fantasies play out. Sarah hadn't destroyed Richard's life or sought to humiliate him publicly. Instead, she had simply built something so successful and fulfilling that his opinion of her became irrelevant. The prenup that was supposed to be Sarah's limitation had become her liberation. The marriage that was supposed to define her had become the catalyst for her self-definition. The man who had tried to diminish her had inadvertently revealed just how extraordinary she actually was. Sarah's story proves that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Not because the experience itself was positive, but because it forces you to discover strength, creativity, and resilience you didn't know you possessed. If you found Sarah's story inspiring and want to hear more transformational tales of people who turned their lowest moments into their greatest victories, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to rewrite their life's narrative, and let us know in the comments what part of Sarah's journey resonated most with you. Your support helps us bring you more stories that prove the most powerful transformations often begin with the most difficult circumstances. Remember, your current situation is not your final destination. Sometimes what looks like the end is actually the beginning of something far more extraordinary than you ever imagined possible.